One evening, towards the end of September 2013, I was on my way back home, and I can't quite remember where I'd been. Still, I was feeling somewhat snackish and, typically, at about 10 at night, having had a little too much to drink, my glucose levels were low and I felt ravenous. My brain was craving carbohydrates, and I succumbed to the temptation of buying a piping hot garage pie and a Coke. I pulled into a corner BP garage close to where I lived, and as I walked past the newsstand where all the magazines and newspapers were displayed, something caught my eye and immediately filled me with horror. On the top shelf of the racks of the newspapers was a copy of the Star newspaper with a photograph of me, cloned from my Facebook page. The picture took up at least half of the display, and with my mouth agape and in total disbelief, I read the glaring headline above the photograph: "Stop this butcher." My mind went completely numb, and I furtively looked around the shop to see if anyone would recognize me and start mumbling under their hands. I simply couldn't fathom that a sentient human being would craft a cruel and demeaning headline with the intent of inflicting maximum humiliation on another human being. Everything was a blur after this, and I'm not sure if I got that garage pie and Coke. I scuttled out of the all-night store, got into my car, and just sat there staring into space, trying to make sense of it all. I didn't even buy a copy of the newspaper for fear that the cashier would recognize me. I knew that reading the vile diatribe in the article wouldn't alleviate the mental anguish I was already experiencing. It finally dawned on me that this was the first salvo of a shitstorm that had been brewing for many years. I'm unsure whether I'd been deluding myself about the danger I was in or simply blissfully ignorant of what was coming. This was the beginning of a particularly vicious and vindictive media campaign. For the weeks and months that ensued after this episode, my mind was numb, and I still had to come to terms with the extreme malice from which this witch hunt emanated. I tried to get my mind off the bombshell that had been dropped, and one day, while traveling through Johannesburg to visit my children, my eyes happened to chance on a Star newspaper poster that was directly in my line of sight. I couldn't help but read the blazing headline: "Butcher list grows." Every patient I had treated over the last 18 years who had expressed dissatisfaction with their operations came to mind. Were they all hopping on the bandwagon to bask in the limelight? I cringed with humiliation at the prospect of my children or my siblings seeing these headlines splashed all over town. I had often seen colleagues from other specialities targeted by largely sensationalist tabloids like the Star newspaper. I was perplexed at how a journalist could sit down behind a keyboard and trash a doctor with hateful and vile rhetoric. In some ways, I had a sense of complacency, thinking to myself that this would never happen to me. It would seem that second-rate journalists who end up working at tacky newspapers such as the Star relish the prospect of branding doctors with the most demeaning and humiliating labels. The zenith in the career of a journalist of this ilk is to be able to brand a surgeon as a butcher. This type of journalist dreams of covering a story in which they can pepper the article with the word botched. They have no regard for the fact that this doctor is a normal human who has parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters, children and grandchildren. Their objective is to dehumanize that doctor in order to inflict maximum pain and humiliation with the intent of destroying their reputation. I recently found a movie on the story of Richard Jewell on Netflix. He was a security guard who had alerted the police in the Centennial Olympic Park bombing at the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta. He was a very simple and low-intelligence man, possibly a little irritating at times, but nevertheless bore no malice. He was initially hailed as a hero. He had spotted the bomb and alerted the police, and as the crowd was being cleared, the bomb went off, but with far fewer casualties than if the public had not been removed. A particularly malicious newspaper reporter was grasping at straws to find some sensationalistic aspect to boost the sales of her newspaper, and she managed to get a snippet of false information from one of the FBI officers and promptly went and splashed it all over the newspapers